Good afternoon and welcome to the December 12th meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. I'm Luke Schmidt, president of our club and president of L.B. Schmidt Associates. To lead us in our invocation today is Lori Flannery, the CEO of New Directions Housing Corporation, and also a member of our Governance Advisory Committee. Lori.
Good afternoon, everyone. David Mattingly enjoys Louisville, born and raised here. Fifth generation native, his roots in the city run deep. He is a proud graduate of Seneca High School. Matter of fact, his first newscast was part of a class project there. He's been a reporter and anchor here at Wave 3 News for the past 2 years, currently co-anchoring the 7 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. newscasts. But his Louisville TV debut was with Randy and Cactus on the Hoedown show when he was 9 years old. David enjoys traveling to all 50 states, 20 countries, and 6 continents. As a CNN correspondent for nearly a quarter of a century, he tells me he plans to never leave home again. David enjoys telling compelling stories in Birmingham, Alabama, as a reporter, anchor, and documentary producer for the local NBC affiliate TV station there. In New York City with the attacks of 9/11, in New Orleans with the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, and here in Louisville just this week with the inauguration of the new governor. He knows news, winning Peabody and Emmy Awards for his skills. He knows fake news destabilizes governments and threatens elections. He will talk to us today on how to tell the difference, sharing his perspectives from 40 years in the field. Please welcome David Mattingly.
Don't you love it when your boss says nice things about you in front of people? That was great. It's true, I'm a Louisville native. The values that I grew up with here, I took with me wherever I went, and they served me well. And I can't tell you how happy I am to be home every day, and how grateful I am to Ken, who sold me on the idea of coming back home. It was the best decision I ever made. Now, in the roles that I've played in the past, I've been a journalist a long time. I've spoken to a lot of groups, including some Rotary groups around the country. And I need to tell you, you without a doubt are the most attractive, the smartest, and by far the nicest Rotary group in the entire country. Rotarians around the world wish they were you. The ones who don't are sadly misinformed. Which brings us to our topic of today. I forgot my pointer. Hold on. Here we go. Fake news. That little moment we just shared will be relevant as we explore what this is all about. Today, the word fake news is a term that's been popularized, politicized, and weaponized by our current president. But fake news is actually something that goes much deeper than that. It's much more insidious. It travels at the speed of light, and it's probably showing up in your social media feeds as we speak. It's dangerous in the fact that in some cases it's beginning to destabilize democracies. It's making it difficult for leaders to form a consensus among their people, and it's making life miserable for people in the communication field like myself. Fake news has actually been around with us forever. We love a great story. A lot of times fake news has an element of conspiracy about it, like I'm giving you some information that somebody didn't want you to know. Naturally, that's something that's going to get our attention. Naturally, that's something that once we ingest that information, we're likely to share with somebody else. There have been some great fake news stories in our lifetime. Who could forget the day that Paul McCartney died? How many of you remember that rumor from back in the 60s and 70s? Yes, I am that old. In 1966, the story goes, Paul McCartney left the studio after having a fight with his fellow Beatle bandmates, got into a car wreck, and was decapitated. For years, that rumor kept building. Nobody knows where it started. But the Beatles actually put out a press release to say, Paul is not dead. The rumor continued to grow. The rumor was that they had a Beatle look-alike contest, and a man who looked just like Paul McCartney won the contest and was made a member of the band. His name was William Shears Campbell, Billy Shears. How could we have missed that sign? That's one of the things about fake news. There's always an element of truth or pseudo-truth that makes you think, well, this is plausible. This could happen. The rumor also went on to say that John Lennon was so overcome with remorse about going on with this deception that he started putting clues in their music. The walrus was Paul. He blew his mind out in a car. It was right in front of us the whole time. We didn't see it. Paul was dead. Some people were so convinced that this happened. Until 1969, when Paul McCartney actually agreed to do an interview with Life magazine entitled, Paul is Still With Us. He had to actually agree to come out of his hiding, which he was really enjoying a private life with his family on their farm. He came out of that seclusion to do an interview to show, I'm not dead. And one of the great quotes was from Paul McCartney, I hope the rumors are not true. Sometimes these types of fake news issues are not so humorous. In 1996, TWA Flight 800 blew up in midair off the coast of Long Island on its way to Paris. 230 people died. At the time, there was a great deal of concern that this was an act of terrorism. There was also concern that based on eyewitnesses, people saw some strange things, what looked like flames going up toward the plane at the time before there was a great explosion, leading people to think the possibility of a missile attack. The NTSB went to the extraordinary measures of recovering pieces of the airplane, almost all of the airplane, from the bottom of the ocean and then reassembling it in a hangar in Washington, D.C. This was extraordinary. This was never done in the history of aviation and hasn't been done since. I've actually been inside the reassembled portions of the plane. The NTSB, through months and months of investigation and very painstaking work, were able to find out that they went through miles and miles of wiring, and they found a lot of the wiring in the plane, the insulation had become brittle and broken, and it was possible for these bundles of wires, where they were carrying different types of current, possibly for the electricity in one to leak out of one line and go into another. They believe that happened in the center fuel tank, which is right in the middle of that dark spot of the mock-up that they, or of the model that they put back together there. I've actually been inside that. That fuel tank was empty at the time, just full of fumes. And they believe a spark from one of those bundled wires went off, set that off, and there was the explosion in midair. There was nothing else they found to suggest anything else happened. If there had been a missile attack, there would have been microscopic imprints all over the outside of that airplane. It would have been impossible to hide. And yet the investigators found none of that. They completely ruled out a missile attack. And yet, today, there are still people making money off of documentaries, off of books, telling us that there was a conspiracy, that there was a cover-up, that there was indeed a missile attack or some other terrible hidden cause behind this airplane. I put together a 2-hour documentary for CNN before I left about this flight, and in that 2-hour documentary, we debunked many of the popular fake news, conspiracy theories out there, and yet they still persist. There are some common characteristics of fake news. Fake news is compelling. It's a story we want to hear. It's a story we want to tell other people. It contains an element of truth. It seems plausible. It's often conspiratorial in nature. Like I said, I've got some information somebody didn't want you to have. Naturally, that makes you want to have it. And it aims to manipulate our pre-existing biases and beliefs. You are the most attractive Rotary Club in the world. So knowing this, how can you spot fake news? Can you spot the fake? Look at these headlines. These are all actual headlines that tore up social media, that probably landed in your social media feeds. I'll go through these one at a time. Trump signs executive order banning public booing. How many people think that's fake? You're right, that's fake. The way this got traction on social media was because someone created a mock-up of a presidential tweet. It had the president's face, it looked just like a presidential tweet. He used language that he was using, saying that I am signing an executive order in line with the anti-bullying campaign of my wife Melania to outlaw public booing. It was completely false. And yet, that tweet shared on social media racked up 10,000 likes in less than a day. Representative Omar's children arrested for starting church fire. How many think that's fake? That seems obvious. The story went viral after it was published by a website called usanetwork.info, which sounds like a really reputable source, doesn't it? It wasn't. It had been, what usanetwork.info did, it had published information it had gotten from another website called Bust a Troll. Bust a Troll publishes nothing but satire, and had written this satirical article about this representative's children starting a church fire. usanetwork.info published it as if it was fact with no disclaimer whatsoever. The story was completely false and it went viral. Extremely rare purple lobster caught in Maine. Who thinks that's fake? Get this. The story went viral after it was reported by multiple local news outlets in Maine. Station WMTW started this when it aired a photograph it had gotten off of a private Facebook page called All Things Lobstering. This was a Facebook page set up for lobster fishermen, by lobster fishermen, and it was an inside joke. This guy with the Photoshop decided, I'm going to tell a story about a purple lobster. The local TV station didn't bother to check out and find if it was true or not. Next thing you know, that's going viral, people wanting to know all about the purple lobster in Maine. This actually was fake news. Now, finally, Democratic presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard voted for the House impeachment resolution. Remember about how fake news has that element where it sounds plausible. How many people think this is fake? I'm sorry, I completely set you up. This one's real. But there's a twist to this. That announcement came from a Twitter account belonging to someone by the name of Catturd. C-A-T-T-U-R-D. It got 18,000 likes just like that. And it's completely true. But the twist here was Ann Coulter retweeted the post and claimed that this was false because Gabbard is a senator, not a representative. Ann Coulter got it wrong. Gabbard is a representative. That was completely true. And the disclaimer provided by Ann Coulter turned out to be fake news. You see how complicated this is? So how do you possibly protect yourself from fake news? And the answer is you have to become a better news consumer. That's what I'd like to try and help you do today. Life for a news consumer used to be so easy. Who remembers these guys? Chet Huntley, David Brinkley. When I was really little, learning how to talk, every time we would watch NBC News and Chet would turn to David Brinkley and say, the way they would end their newscast, Chet would say, "Good night, David," and then David would say, "Good night, Chet." Every time Chet would say, "Good night, David," I would stand up and I'd say, "Good night, Chet." Oddly enough, when I started working at CNN, I actually worked with a guy named Chet. But anyway, I put this picture up here because we used to have very limited choices. We had 3 networks who basically all had the same standards. The same standards for context, for accuracy, for transparency. They were all competing with each other and they were all policing each other. The product that they gave us was reliable and we trusted them. Today we have many choices. We have programs that look like these guys used to look. They sound like these guys used to look. But the information they're delivering is not the same as what those guys used to give us. What has happened in our time is that the internet has leveled the playing field. When I went into journalism, I had to get a degree in journalism. I had to get an internship. I had to get a job at a television station that spent millions of dollars on a building, a transmitter, a license, all sorts of things just to go into business so I can put my work out to the public. Today, anybody with a phone can do the same thing I do. Not only that, my first job was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I was only speaking to the people of Tuscaloosa. Today, with your phone, you can put something out to the entire world at any given time. And this is the result. It's not just an American phenomenon, it's happening all over the world, and it's endangering democracies all over the world. These headlines are just an indication of what happens with every single election that's happening in every free society. There have been no end of academic studies about fake news, trying to, as we sort of grapple with this idea of what it is, why it is, and how do we control it. One of my favorites here, combined exposure to multiple news sources and political attitudes of inefficacy, alienation, and cynicism. And the other one of my favorite, a meta-analysis of the psychological efficacy of messages countering misinformation. This is really serious stuff. And the results of some of these studies have been astonishing. There have been no shortage of public opinion studies done as well. And this is the result. Many Americans believe fake news is sowing confusion, to which I replied, well, done. Many Americans say made-up news is a critical problem that needs to be fixed. Okay. But here's where we get into why or who we're blaming fake news on. Politicians are viewed as a major contributor. People over 65 share fake news more often than others, so let's blame the old people. Fake news is a nuisance to young people. They don't really care about whether or not it's true or not, so let's blame the young people for sharing all this. And Twitter bots, those automated sites that are constantly pumping out stories to thousands and thousands of people as we speak. This is what's really going on. This was a great study that was done by the Knight Foundation. In the month before the last presidential election, there were 6.6 million tweets referencing 600 plus fake or conspiracy websites. 600 places where you could get bad information being sent out 6.6 million times. That has to have an impact. Of those 6.6 million tweets, almost 500,000 of them came from different accounts. Of those 500,000 accounts, 73,000 of them were tweeting more than one of those sites, at least 10 times over the 30-day period. There's no one person to blame. We all are to blame, and we all have a responsibility for stopping it. The Mac Daddy of all the studies was from MIT, The Science of Fake News. This was published in Science in March of 2018. Their findings were simple and profound. False information outperforms true information. We love a compelling story. Lies spread faster than truth. It's one of those things where before the internet, if somebody came to us and told us a story that we found hard to believe, we go, really? I can't believe that. And the first thing we would do is turn to somebody else. Can you believe what I just heard? That's what's happening on the internet at the speed of light, thousands and thousands of times a second right now. And lies reach more people than the truth for the same reason. That transmission of false information is accelerated when it comes from someone in a position of authority, or someone that we recognize as having access to information that is valuable. Problems with this landed on our doorstep right after the Kentucky election. Governor Bevin was very public about speaking about election irregularities that he saw and read about on the internet that had not been substantiated. He repeated them quite often until a couple of supporters of his actually were so upset about what was going on, and deservedly so. I mean, as voters, we should all be upset when there are claims of voter irregularities. They actually called a press conference at the Capitol, invited the state's media to show up. And their message to us was, this is all over the internet, what are you doing about it? And the answer was, we had already checked this out, and none of it was holding together. And state election officials came to the same conclusion. But still, we had concerned citizens listening to what was being said, whether the information was substantiated or not, and reacting to it as if it were real. So how do you know if you are reading or hearing fake news? The way to keep this from happening to you is to become a better news consumer. And what I'm about to tell you now seems pretty simple, but in my career, it has actually been pretty accurate and can help you in making good decisions for your information consumption. When you get fake news tends to do three things to you. It makes you feel angry, it makes you feel afraid, or it makes you feel smug. You are the most attractive Rotarians in the world. And the people who don't think that don't know what they're talking about. You didn't actually look like that little smug emoji, but I know you were feeling it. A lot of things about fake news and the way that it's traveled and the way that it's shared and the way it winds up in your feeds is that it appeals to some of our pre-existing beliefs and biases. It means that we're an easy target. We have to become more discernible. We have to start essentially all acting like reporters. We have to treat things skeptically. We have to find our own information, and we have to identify sources of information that we can rely on. Because when you have good information, how does it make you feel? It makes you feel confident, doesn't it? When you have information that helps you make a good decision, it makes you feel better. It makes you more curious. It makes you want to learn more things. And it makes you feel more empowered to participate in society. It's exactly the opposite of what fake news is trying to do. There's an intention behind fake news. It's not an accident. There's an intention behind it. Angry, afraid, or smug versus confident, curious, and empowered. There's a big difference there. So, how do we keep you in the lane that keeps you confident, curious, and empowered? Fact checking. This is something I do almost every day. There's hardly any time that I'm on social media that I don't read an article that's been shared to me by one of my friends that I don't have to go back and fact check it. Most of the time, the stuff I'm sent is not correct. Snopes.com is excellent. Politico or PolitiFact is excellent, and also Associated Press Fact Check. Those are my go-tos. I love those. They help me out a lot. Even in real news, when I'm trying to find out what's going on, their research is excellent. News sources. Finding a diverse set of news sources and things that you rely on are going to be essential in helping you become news consumers. That's my daily reading list. I start with the Courier Journal. For a city its size, Louisville has great news outlets. The Courier Journal is a great paper for a city this size. We also have 4 incredibly competitive television stations that all do a really good job. And it would be great for me standing in front of my boss to tell you how wonderful a way it is we are. But Louisville is an unusual market where you have 4 very good, very competitive stations. That competitiveness makes us all better. And it makes you as news consumers also very rich in the choices that you have. For national news, I go to the Washington Post. I go to the New York Times. Even then, I look at the differences in how they cover different stories so I can make up my own mind about what's really going on. CNN.com, I think, is a great source for national and international news. CNN.com, I don't get a chance to watch CNN on the air anymore. For regional news, I love the Chicago Tribune and the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I've been reading those for years. And for international news, sometimes when the news just gets so politicized here, sometimes you have to take a step back to get a broader perspective on things, and I found that BBC, Financial Times, and CNNInternational.com are also very helpful in that regard. That's the end of my presentation. Now again, the idea is for you to become better news consumers. As a journalist, I still adhere to my standards of transparency, accuracy, context, and very often the problem with fake news is in context, and that's where you have to work to find out what's really the story. So, with that in mind, what kind of questions do you have for me? If you don't mind, I'm just going to step down off the podium and walk around a little bit.
Thank you for being here today. What about references and places to go for news for children?
I don't have children. That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. Wow. You know what? Adult sources of news are also valuable to children. You just have to filter it through. Well, that's I was 6 years old, and every day, we were a 2-paper family. We'd have the Courier Journal in the morning. I'd come home after school. The first thing I did was tear open the Louisville Times. I'd spread it all over the floor and look at things. But look what happened to me. Yeah. But I think that's a good exercise to walk your children through sources of news and explain to them how to digest information, how to find things that are valuable to them, and how not to trust them.
Mohammed Babar, that's a great point. My 12-year-old was looking at election ads through YouTube, which I had no clue really what can get the election. Of the leaders who spread rumors or the news which assist them, and then the journalists who then magnify and then continue to spread around in the nation, who holds the more responsibility?
The national news media, still, in spite of what the president says, does a great job at covering what's happening in our country. There are some news outlets that are better than others, and you saw which ones that I prefer. Washington Post has been my go-to since Watergate. It's difficult as citizens just to tune out the noise. And because we have so many choices, you really don't know where to go sometimes. I mean, it's never been more difficult as an information and news consumer than it is today. And it's because of all those choices and it's because of all the information that we are being bombarded with. I hope what I've told you today helps you narrow your focus a little bit and might help you make some good decisions going forward.
Hi, David. David and I were in Leadership Louisville together just last year.
Best class ever.
And so we shared quite a bit of time together, and I know a little bit about David's work history, and that you have worked with, covering a lot of governors and presidents, and so you have a lot of history and experience. So I would be interested to know, what has been your takeaway from following the governor in the last 4 years as compared to earlier administrations? Are there any differences, and what? I would just be interested to hear your take on that.
Well, fortunately, in my line of work, I've had exposure, very close exposure to a lot of heads of state. I've covered every president at some point in their careers since Gerald Ford. I've been able to observe these extraordinary people and really start to appreciate them for the people that they are. When it comes to Governor Matt Bevin, I will say this. I found him to be an incredibly fascinating figure, both personally and politically, even when he was insulting me to my face. And because we live in such highly politicized times, I'm going to use a phrase from Forrest Gump and say, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Follow up a little bit on the political angle. We have, you've been around quite a few years, obviously, and when we come to the situation we are in our country now, where it seems we've got more and more polarized between politically between left and right, and the room in the middle is shrinking, and fewer and fewer people seem to be in the middle, and the polls will support that. People prefer, with the news outlets, to filter facts through one angle or another. So it's as if we're all wearing glasses with different shades of them and seeing same facts in a
That's
very
true.
different way. And we see that playing out in the impeachment trial, etc. So I'm wondering what you think and what you've seen in terms of people's responsibility, who are newsmakers, who are news reporters, in terms of telling it like it is and telling the true facts. And is there some way we can get back to a situation where we don't have a society that's so polarized, based in part on the fact that we get facts from seeing such a fact?
Yeah, there's never been a more difficult time, more important time for good journalists to do good work. And there are a lot of good journalists in this country doing that. The polarization you're seeing is actually fed by the cycle of fake news, because it's appealing to our predisposed beliefs and prejudices and previous thoughts and political opinions, whatever you want to call it. It's actually reinforcing us and pushing us to further toward the edges of political beliefs where there is no middle. Not all fake news does that, but remember the idea of angry, afraid, or smug? Nothing pushes you to the margins faster than one of those three emotions.
Leland with Nancy. Thanks for coming back home.
My pleasure.
And for your thought-provoking presentation today. It'd be nice if all the fake news came from the internet, but the FCC used to have something called the Fairness Doctrine, which is, as I understood it, said if you told a story, you really had to get both sides. At some point, did that go away? And what is the effect of Fox News on one extreme, MSNBC at the other extreme, and others where you're not quite sure where they fall, even in the mainstream broadcast media?
Now, there might be some legal mind in the room that can answer that better than I can. The rules are different from what they used to be. I think it was recognized at some level that not all truths are equal, so you don't have to have all points of view recognized. But you're right, if there was true fairness going on, you would not be able to have entire news networks dedicated to one point of view. I don't know the answer to that.
David, great presentation. I think everybody in here would agree with most everything you said, most importantly, the fact that we are attractive.
And smart.
Smart. And most everything else you said. Most of the news outlets you put up on your PowerPoint, the ones that you go to, Washington Post, etc., certain leaders, a couple of which have been mentioned today, call that fake news and discredit what you are saying is legitimate, balanced coverage. Is that not a really big problem? And you just kind of
Yes, it is a problem, and it's something that when I speak to other journalists, I talk about this frequently. There's a time, this is a time when the work that I and others do in this line of work, we are personally denigrated, our work is disparaged, and it's difficult sometimes to reach our audience through the noise. We're just having to try harder. It's not so much here at the local level or at the state level, but definitely at the national level. I've seen some of my former colleagues have some particularly difficult times where they ended up becoming the news instead of the news that they're trying to tell, which is sad. No one wants to be in that position. As I said at the beginning of my remarks, our president has popularized this term of fake news and as well as politicized and weaponized it. And he's done it effectively for people who support him and share his point of view. My point to you is, make up your own mind. Look at different news sources, even the ones that I consider legitimate and valuable, you may not. But again, if you're finding news that just makes you feel angry, afraid, or smug, you're not doing yourself a service. You need to find information that makes you more confident, makes you more curious, and makes you more empowered to be involved in society.
Hey, I have a question. I think part of your introduction is fake news. I don't believe as a youth you were on Hayloft Hoedown. I think it was D.R.V. Rich.
No, I was on Hayloft Hoedown. They had a studio audience that was brought in, and my Cub Scout group was part of the studio audience. Cactus asked me to tell a joke, and the way this happened was really a twist of fate. They had time for 3 kids to tell 3 jokes. The kid right next to me turned out to be number 3, and he told a joke about an elephant sitting on a marshmallow, and it was kind of off color, and they decided to cut him out. Then he came to me. Cactus handed me the microphone, and my joke was, if all the cars in the United States were painted pink, what would you have? A pink carnation. And my career in television was born. I never got to be on T-Bar-B, but I love that show, and I can sing the T-Bar-B song, given enough bourbon.
Hi, David. Moving away from the political culture, Merriam-Webster, I believe, just this week declared that the word "they" can now be used as a singular pronoun because of the gender fluid movement. As a journalist, my last job was my English teacher mother would be rolling in her grave if I broadcast a sentence using "they" as a singular. How do you work around that?
I'm old school. I stick to the old interpretation.
Well, those persons who prefer to be called "they" instead of him or her because of the gender
I got you.
identity issue, as Merriam-Webster just this week has said, that they can now be used correctly as a singular.
I address everyone as they prefer to be addressed, and I make sure I ask.
Let's give David another round of applause. It's a wonderful presentation.
Seriously, you are much better.
I guess, should we say to people at this table? Okay. That concludes our program today. Thank you for coming. Remember, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Rotary, please see Craig Sherman right outside at the entrance. And with that, we are adjourned.